Hello, my name is Yuanqi Fu. Today I'm presenting this work I did with Professor Jody Schneider and Professor Catherine Blake from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. In this talk, I will first discuss the Keystone Citations and the Keystone Framework, and then I'll talk about the work we did to automatically extract Keystone Citations. So, what are Keystone Citations? The idea that citations are used to support argument comes a long way. As early as 1977, Nigel Gilbert, a sociologist, wrote in his paper referencing as persuasion that references are used to provide authoritative grounds to persuade readers of the validity and the significance of the argument in the paper. However, another famous researcher in Science of Science, Henry Small, disagrees. He thinks that we should not give a causal explanation why author-scientists cite certain papers or not. To understand how citations play into the validity of a paper, Jody and I developed a framework to identify citations that can make or break a paper's argument. This research is motivated by both theoretical interest and practical concerns. First, we're curious when the citation matters to the validity of a paper. Second, there is the concerning trend that retracted paper kept being cited, and predominantly as valid work. So, under what circumstances should papers citing retracted work also be scrutinized too? This is a simplified version of the Keystone framework. It has 3 steps: document modeling, citation context analysis, and classification. And I'm going to use an example to illustrate the process. First, we model the argument supporting a main finding in an Alzheimer research paper using the micropublication ontology. And you can see here, this is the main finding. And it is supported by 2 statements. Let's say S1, S2. And then the statement S2 is supported by some data generated using a method, and this method relies on some experimental materials. And we'll talk about this part in the next slide. Second, we carry out citation context analysis. We use citation context, which is the text surrounding a citation string, to find citations that align with components in the argument diagram. What does that mean? Basically here I have 2 parent mouse models. Parent 1, which can express protein only in EC, which is a part of the brain, and the parent 2, which can express a kind of protein called human tau protein. And if I go back to the text, I can find where those 2 mouse models were mentioned, along with their properties. And I realized that those properties were supported by 2 citations, Yasuda and May 4, 2006, and Santa Cruz et al. 2005. And if I put those citations back into the argument diagram, here is what I get. However, if we find a citation that is aligned with a component in the argument diagram, does that mean we find a keystone citation? Not always. There are 2 reasons. First, one may cite many items. And second, people can make mistakes in citation. That's why we have a 3rd step, which is the classification. The current classification system is based on 2 questions. First, how many items were cited? And second, whether the cited items' main findings support the citation context. Here I want to emphasize something we find in our case study for the JCDL paper, which is the pass-through support. So in this case, It is not the cited paper, but the references of the cited paper provide the support. When I presented work last year at JCDL, one common question is, can you mine such information? In the fall 2020, I started to take Kathy's text mining class, and this naturally became my project. I was facing two challenges. The first one is that finding Keystone citations requires a global understanding of a paper, which may limit automated approaches. The solution is that we will first focus on a subset of the Keystone citations, citations that support research methods and materials. We will call them methods Keystone citations. The reasons are two. First, under the three argument-based ontologies, citations that support methods and materials will always be Keystone citations. And second, their Keystone status can be determined by using citation context only, although there will be outliers, as we will see later. The second challenge is that I don't have a gold standard dataset for training. And the solution is that we repurpose the classifiers trained on biomedical abstract sentences with section labels such as background, objective, methods, result, and conclusions. We also got hold of a manually labeled dataset from Halil. Here is the proposed strategy. We take the citation context sentence, CCS, for the citation C. We pass the sentence through 5 binary classifiers. The expectation is that only sentences that are classified as methods contain Keystone citations. This is how our training dataset was constructed. First, 500 abstracts were randomly selected from PubMed without subfield specification. Then they were tokenized into sentences, keeping all except 34 that were not part of the narrative, such as funding information. Then, 3 bioinformatic experts annotated them. Finally, this is the distribution of the instances. We have more methods and result instances in general. I have 2 test datasets. They were not intended to benchmark the performance of the classifiers, but rather to understand how well the strategy we proposed could work. The first dataset contained 9 citation context sentences that contain methods Keystone citations and collected with Jody from the JCDL work. And the second dataset is a collection of 99 citation context sentences citing the Willoughby-Hoare protocol. This is a computational chemistry protocol that was later discovered to have reproducibility issues. Because I did a case study with the protocol for the JCDL paper, it was relatively easy for me to annotate those citation contexts as whether they contain Keystone citations or not. The machine learning models were rather primitive. I used bag-of-words representation and selected the top 1,000 feature terms by information gain, which is basically how clean-cut a term distributes between one class and the rest of the dataset. And on the right side is the performance metrics based on tenfold cross-validation. I have good precision for 3 classes, but rather poor recall overall. Lately, I have a friend who tried by LSTM on the same dataset, and she got some pretty good results, so definitely this is not optimized yet. What is interesting for me is to see how the classifiers work on real citation context sentences. I actually wasn't expecting much because my classifiers were not that good, and the training dataset were from abstract and the testing dataset were from full text. But I think the results surprised me a bit. The methods classifiers, as we see here, picked out 4 sentences as we wished. Now let's take a look at the errors. One sentence is classified as a result. If you examine it closely, it is actually a hybrid. It describes a method, the use of monoclonal antibody to confirm the expression of tau protein, and a result, the conformation of the strong expression of tau protein. And if you look at the two cases in the middle, they both receive no positive classification, and which we call no hit. And I think this is the failure of the imperfect methods classifiers, because both sentences reads to me like method sentence. And the last case is also interesting. It provides a justification for method, which is the use of synaptic marker to measure neuron damage. However, this is something I would call delocalization, because you cannot tell the keystone status just by reading the sentence by itself. The results from the Willoughby-Hoy dataset is also fascinating to me. First, again, we see that the distribution of methods keystone citations in two categories, methods and results. This matches what we found in the JCDL dataset. I think there are two reasons why this happened. First one is that methods, the existence of methods result hybrids. And second, some result sentences, they describe the way of doing research, but contain phrases that give a sense of closure, such as work calculated, work carried out, which make them classified as results. And on the other hand, you can also see that sentences classified as background or conclusions have a lower chance of becoming keystone citations. When I wrote the paper, I only annotated the 43 sentences that got a positive classification. But then I got some time, so I went back and annotated the entire data set and filled out the rest of the cells. One thing I found also interesting is that in about half of the instances, Willoughby-Hoy data protocol, despite being a very typical method paper, is not a method keystone citation. Here is our revised strategy, also our main conclusions. So instead of only using methods classifiers, we realized that we need to use both methods and result classifiers, because sentences classified as methods or results have a high chance of containing methods keystone citations. On the other hand, sentences classified as background or conclusions have a low chance of containing methods keystone citations. Still, the Willoughby-Hoy dataset is small, and the revised strategy need to be verified using more data. So we have a list of things to do in the future. First, I need to fine-tuning the current classifiers. I need to experiment with multi-class classifiers and neural networks. And I need to evaluate the strategy with more data. And when I was talking to Kathy, I said, what's the next step for me? And she said, eventually you will need gold standard data set of citation context sentences for training if you want it to work. So we're in the process of applying fundings for this task. Hopefully, when I have the gold standard data set, I can train classifiers for the real-world applications of finding methods keystone citations. And thank you very much for coming to my presentation. And here is my contact too, which is hopefully easy to remember.